Great. Well, before Greg speaks to us, we're going to have our reading for the night. It's quite a long one tonight, but it's all good. So if you want to take out the John's Gospel that is on your chair, and by all means take these away with you at the end of the night. They're yours to keep. And we're going to start from where there's a big number 20, which for some of you will be on page 56. And if it's not, it will be some pages either side. Sorry, I'm not actually sure what number it will be, but around there. Okay. And I'll start reading for us. Early on the first day of the week, while it was still dark, Mary Magdalene went to the tomb and saw that the stone had been removed from the entrance. So she came running to Simon Peter and the other disciple, the one Jesus loved, and said, "They have taken the Lord out of the tomb, and we don't know where they have put him." So Peter and the other disciple started for the tomb. Both were running, but the other disciple outran Peter and reached the tomb first. He bent over and looked in at the strips of linen lying there, but did not go in. Then Simon Peter, who was behind him, arrived and went into the tomb. He saw the strips of linen lying there, as well as the burial cloth that had been around Jesus' head. The cloth was folded up by itself, separate from the linen. Finally, the other disciple, who had reached the tomb first, also went inside. He saw and believed. They still did not understand from Scripture that Jesus had to rise from the dead.
Then the disciples went back to their homes, but Mary stood outside the tomb crying. As she wept, she bent over to look into the tomb and saw two angels in white seated where Jesus' body had been, one at the head and the other at the foot. They asked her, "Woman, why are you crying?" "They have taken my Lord away," she said, "and I don't know where they have put him." At this, she turned around and saw Jesus standing there, but she did not realize that it was Jesus. "Woman," he said, "why are you crying? Who is it you are looking for?" Thinking he was the gardener, she said, "Sir, if you have carried him away, tell me where you have put him, and I will get him." Jesus said to her, "Mary." She turned towards him and cried out in Aramaic, "Rabboni," which means teacher. Jesus said, "Do not hold on to me, for I have not yet returned to the Father. Go instead to my brothers and tell them, I am returning to my Father and your Father, to my God and your God." Mary Magdalene went to the disciples with the news, "I have seen the Lord," and she told them that he had said these things to her.
On the evening of that first day of the week, when the disciples were together, with the doors locked for fear of the Jews, Jesus came and stood among them and said, "Peace be with you." After he said this, he showed them his hands and side. The disciples were overjoyed when they saw the Lord. Again Jesus said, "Peace be with you. As the Father has sent me, I am sending you." And with that, he breathed on them and said, "Receive the Holy Spirit. If you forgive anyone his sins, they are forgiven. If you do not forgive them, they are not forgiven."
Now Thomas, called Didymus, one of the 12, was not with the disciples when Jesus came. So the other disciples told him, "We have seen the Lord." But he said to them, "Unless I see the nail marks in his hands, and put my finger where the nails were, and put my hand into his side, I will not believe it." A week later, his disciples were in the house again, and Thomas was with them. Though the doors were locked, Jesus came and stood among them and said, "Peace be with you." Then he said to Thomas, "Put your finger here, see my hands. Reach out your hand and put it into my side. Stop doubting and believe." Thomas said to him, "My Lord and my God." Then Jesus told him, "Because you have seen me, you have believed. Blessed are those who have not seen and yet have believed." Jesus did many other miraculous signs in the presence of his disciples, which are not recorded in this book. But these are written that you may believe that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of God, and that by believing you may have life in his name.
Thanks very much. So the topic this evening is, this is real. What makes you come alive? So sport for me, and lots of sport, and particular probably surfing. I love surfing. I was brought up in the Channel Islands in Jersey. There's a lot of sea there, so we got to go in the water a lot. But probably my best time, most memorable time at least, surfing, came when I was traveling whilst I was at uni. I went to Australia, and I was down there visiting a friend, and he knew I loved to surf. He was a bodyboarder, and he said, "Oh, we'll take you surfing." And we were in South Australia. He is from Adelaide. And he said, "There's an amazing spot that I want to take you." Now, it's quite a long way from where I live, but I've got the car, I've got you aboard, let's go. So one morning, we got up very early in the morning, and we drove for about an hour and a half to the edge of this national park. And then we went through the gates, and we drove through the national park. So there's no buildings around, nothing, for a good 20 miles until we came to the coast. So we were totally isolated. It was just the two of us. And we parked the car, and we got out, and we stood at the top of this cliff, and there was beautiful sandy beach as far as the eye could see. And rolling in from the sea were these beautiful waves. Sunny. It couldn't be better. And I was thrilled. We got our wetsuits on. It was pretty cold, apparently, in the water. So we put our wetsuits on, grabbed the boards, and we walked down this footpath. And it took us quite a while to get to the beach. And when we got to the beach, my stomach sort of dropped a little bit, because it was a lot bigger from the beach than it was from the top of the cliff. I mean, that should have been obvious. But it hadn't occurred to me. And when I got to the beach, it was pretty huge. In fact, the shore break, just the little waves at the edge of the sea, not the big break that we were going to, was over my head height. But I didn't want to look like a softie to my Aussie mates, so I didn't say anything. I was like, "Oh yeah, this is fine. Oh great waves." Absolutely panicking inside. And he didn't seem fazed at all. He just dived straight through a wave, and off he went, paddling out towards the main break. And so I kind of did the same, and managed to get out, and we were sitting out there. And I realized after a while that we'd paddled out on a bit of a lull, because suddenly these huge waves started to roll in. Huge waves. And he dropped into a few, and I just sat there, slightly panicking. And the weather at this stage had slightly turned. Some clouds had come in, and it started to rain. And I remember getting more and more worried. In the car journey, he told me that it's a great area for sharks, which hadn't helped. And so I'm sitting there, freezing, in the rain, in enormous waves that when the face of the wave came up, they were at least double my height. Way bigger than I'd ever surfed in my life before. And I knew there were sharks in the water. And my Aussie mate, he was oblivious, he was just, off he went. And I remember my kind of thought process vividly at that moment was, I'm going to die. It's all over. I'm going to end my life here in Australia. I'm going to be eaten by a shark. I can't get in. What am I going to do? And it kind of got worse and worse. I thought, do you know what? I've just got to do it. I've just got to do it. I've just got to get in. Whatever it takes, I've just got to get in. And so I paddled as hard as I could, and this massive wave, and as I went down the face of the wave, I jumped up on my feet, and as I got to the bottom, I turned. And see, the thing is, I hadn't checked the board properly in the car park, and I hadn't really waxed it very well. And my foot slipped off the side of the board, and the board kind of shot away from me, and the wave just went wallop straight on my head. Thrust me right down to the bottom till I hit the sand at the bottom of the sea there. And that was quite frightening. And I don't know if you've ever had that done to you before. Maybe if you've been on a trip down south and you've been in the water, and you kind of get spun around a bit, so you're not entirely sure which way's up. Now, surfing technique is you kind of grab your ankle where your leash is attached, and your board floats, and so you give it a little bit of tug, and you know which way to swim. But it was obvious to me because I was on the sand. So I pushed off the bottom and scrambled to the top, and just about got my head out of the water, breathed, and wallop, the next wave hit me. Down to the bottom, scrambled around, up, didn't make it to the top, next wave thrust me straight back down. Pushed off again, didn't quite make it to the top, next wave, wallop, straight back down. I remember that moment, when that wave knocked me down, thinking, I can't do this, I'm stuck. It's all over. And I remember all my kind of hopes and dreams. I mean, not all of them, obviously, because I wasn't there for very long. But things suddenly came very, very real. Was I ever going to see the end of university? Will I see my family again? What about the things that I planned to do and the hopes and dreams and all the wonderful things that life could hold for me? And it was going to come to an end on the sandy bottom of this beach. I wonder if the disciples, right at the beginning of our reading, felt a little bit like that. They had befriended Jesus. They had seen Jesus do incredible things. They had put their hope and their trust in him. They thought he was the promised one, the one who had been promised for hundreds of years, the Savior, the Messiah, the Christ. And yet, he was dead. Their world had come crashing down around them. Their hopes, their dreams, their thoughts of how it was all going to work out suddenly seemed over, and they were scared. Early on the first day of the week, while it was still dark, Mary Magdalene went to the tomb and saw that the stone had been removed from the entrance. She came running to Simon Peter and the other disciple, the one Jesus loved, and said, "They have taken the Lord out of the tomb, and we don't know where they put him." Things have gone from very bad to worse. Not only is their Lord, their Messiah, the one they've been following, dead and having died hideously, but they didn't get a chance to give him a proper burial because it was their Sabbath day and they weren't allowed to do things on their Sabbath day. And so they just had to put him in a tomb and then wait until that day had gone. And they've now come back and he's not there. Somebody must have stolen him. So not only did they not give him a proper burial, but he's not there, he's gone. Those guys, they both come running, and they see that he's not there either. But then, something totally unexpected happens. Something quite remarkable. They certainly weren't expecting it. And it happened to Mary. She stood outside the tomb crying, sentence 11, and she wept. And she bent over to look into the tomb and saw two angels in white seated where Jesus' body had been, one at the head and the other at the foot. They asked her, "Woman, why are you crying?" "They have taken my Lord away," she said, "and I don't know where they have put him." You see, she thought it was either the Jewish leaders or the Roman soldiers that had taken this body and they got rid of it. And she is crying about it. At this time, she turned round and saw Jesus standing there. But she did not realize that it was Jesus. He asked her, "Woman, why are you crying?" Exactly the same as the angels. "Who is it you are looking for?" Thinking he was the gardener, she said, "Sir, if you have carried him away, tell me where you have put him, and I will get him." And Jesus says one word, "Mary." Straight away, she knows who it is. Suddenly, in her grief, something extraordinary has happened. Her leader, her savior, has been killed. His body has been taken, and suddenly she hears her name from somebody she thinks is the gardener. She turned toward him and cried out in Aramaic, "Rabboni," which means teacher. Jesus is alive. It's totally remarkable. He'd been dead for a while. In fact, all the way through the Sabbath day, he'd been dead in the tomb, and now he is right before her very eyes. He speaks to her, and she dashes back to the disciples and says, "I've seen the Lord." Can you imagine what they're thinking? They are grief-stricken. They are terrified. They are afraid of what's going to happen to them. Their hopes and dreams have been dashed. And Mary comes to them and says, "I've seen the Lord." Now, in those days, in that time, in that place, the witness of a woman didn't really hold up in court. And so, what would they have expected? What is she talking about? Surely she's deluded. surely she cannot be telling the truth. Surely Jesus cannot be alive. That evening, on the evening of the first day, when the disciples were together with the door locked for fear of the Jewish leaders. So a little while later, in the evening, they're all in a room and they've locked the door. Why? Because the Jewish leaders that killed Jesus, they're afraid are now going to come and get rid of them. And they lock the door. And suddenly, Jesus is amongst them. And he says, "Peace be with you." That must have freaked them out a little bit more, don't you think? Frightened, petrified, and then suddenly Jesus is right with them in a room where the door is locked. He is alive. After he said this, he showed them his hands and his side. Now here's why he did that. Jesus had been crucified. He had been killed by the Roman soldiers in a known form of execution of that day. What that involved was, well, in Jesus' case, he was mocked and he was beaten. And then he would have had nails driven through the palms of his hands as he was attached to the cross and through his ankles or his feet. And then he would have been lifted up. And the way that you died through crucifixion was through suffocating. Because you hung there until you could lift your head no longer. And then when you dropped, you could no longer breathe and you die. It's one of the most hideous forms of execution that has ever been invented. And that's how Jesus had died. And to check that they were dead on the cross, the Roman soldiers would often break the legs of the people being crucified. So then they couldn't hold themselves up any longer. But with Jesus, when they came to him, they saw that he was dead. But just to check, they took a spear and they shoved it in his side. And the blood and the water had separated because he'd been dead a while and came out. So they knew he was dead. So just so the disciples knew that it was him, he showed them his hands and his side. Imagine that moment. Somebody who was fully dead, and you saw it, is now fully alive and showing you that it's him. It's incredible, isn't it? An incredible story, at least. And the thing is, he had died for a reason. They didn't know this, and they were about to find out why. In fact, the dots were probably starting to join up for them. You see, time and time again, Jesus had told them that he was going to die, and that 3 days later he was going to rise from the dead. He'd not hidden it from them, he had told them, he had made it pretty clear and plain to them that this was going to happen, and that he came for a reason. He lived with them for 3 years, he healed many people, he taught many things, but the reason he came was to die that death on the cross. Why? Well, for them, and for you, and for me. He died for us. That is the Christian message, that Jesus came to pay for us. And you might think, what on earth does that mean? Why does he need to pay for us? Well, here's what the Bible tells us, that you and I were made for a reason. Not by chance, but for a reason. By a God who's personal and who knows you. And that you are made to be in a relationship with him. Not to exist as if he's not there, running your own life, doing your own thing, but to be in a relationship with him, knowing him personally. But you see, the human condition is that all of us don't do that. We do the opposite. We live as if he's not there, rule our own lives, and end up doing what we want to do and setting the standards for life ourselves, ignoring him. The Bible calls it sin, simple three-letter word with I in the middle. It's all about me. And here's the thing. God is both loving, but to be God, he's got to be perfect. And to be perfect, he must be just. And therefore, he can't be like kind of a Father Christmas character. He's got to hold us to account for the way that we have lived. To be fair, to be just, because it's wrong. And therefore, there is a consequence. And the consequence is both physical death, but also standing before him as the great judge. And each of us being held to account for not only how we've lived or related to each other, but also, more fundamentally, how we've related to him. And in that case, we are all found wanting. And the consequence of that, the Bible calls hell. Jesus was the person that spoke about this the most. It's a place where God is absent. It's not like going to a nightclub. Some people think hell's like a nightclub. Just hang out with my mates and do what I want to do. Now, hell is where all the good things, all the beauty, all the joy that perhaps we experience now and more is absent because God is not there. And everything that is hideous is present. But he came to change our future. He came to change our lives. He came to change our eternity. He died for us. That is the Christian message. That is why he came. And that is why he had these scars in his hands and his side, because he died. The Bible calls that grace. Let me tell you a story to help you understand that a little bit. I don't know, in fact, you probably don't remember. In fact, you definitely won't remember Nelson Mandela coming out of prison, will you? Because it was in the 80s, and most of you weren't alive in the 80s. I was born in 1980, and it was I was quite a small child, but I remember my mother sitting me down in front of the TV to watch these historic scenes that were happening. And as the apartheid came to an end, they set up this court of reconciliation to try and deal with the huge impact of what had happened in the past and to move forward together into the future. This is one of the hearings at the Court of Reconciliation. I'll read it to you. In an emotionally charged courtroom, a South African woman stood with her silent tears, listening to white police officers acknowledge their atrocities. Officer Vanderbroek admitted that he had shot her 18-year-old son at point-blank range. Then he and others partied while they burned her son's body, turning it over and over until it was reduced to ashes. 8 years later, Vanderbroek and his associates returned to seize her husband. She was forced to watch while they poured gasoline over him and set him on fire. As the flames consumed him, her husband's last words were simply, "Forgive them." Now Vanderbroek awaited judgment. The Truth and Reconciliation Commission asked the woman what she wanted. Calmly weeping, she said, "I want 3 things. I want Mr. Vanderbroek to take me to the place where they buried my husband's body so I can gather up the dust and give him a proper burial. Second, Mr. Vanderbroek took all my family from me, and I still have a lot of love to give. So twice a month, I would like for him to come to the ghetto and spend a day with me so I can be a mother to him. Third, I would like Mr. Vanderbroek to know that he is forgiven and that I forgive him. I would like to embrace him so he will know my forgiveness is real." As the elderly woman walked slowly across the courtroom, Officer Vanderbroek stood to receive her embrace and fainted. He was overwhelmed by the power of this African woman. In the back of the courtroom, someone began to sing Amazing Grace. This woman was a Christian, and it goes on to say the reason she offered forgiveness to that man who had done so much is because of the cross of Jesus Christ, because she realized what he had done for her. She understood this word grace, that none of us deserve it, but he gives it freely because he loves us. But so what? So what that this guy came and he died in our place? So what? Well, as we go down and we read about Thomas, we begin to see just the wonder of what is happening in front of us and what it means for us. And what we're starting to see is that this guy, he died, but he did not stay dead, that he is alive. And you might be thinking, I just don't believe that. Nor did Thomas. Have a look what happens next. Thomas, known as Didymus, one of the 12, was not with the disciples when Jesus came. So the other disciples told him, "We have seen the Lord." But he said to them, "Unless I see the nail marks in his hands and put my finger where the nails were and put my hand into his side, I will not believe." I wonder if you feel like that. No, I just want to see for myself. I want to see for myself. Perhaps you're thinking, that's not unreasonable, Thomas. Why trust your friends and their opinion? A week later, his disciples were in the house again, and Thomas was with them. Though the doors were locked, Jesus came in, stood among them, and said, "Peace be with you." Then he said to Thomas, "Put your finger here. See my hands. Reach out your hand and put it into my side. Stop doubting and believe." Look at Thomas's response. "My Lord and my God." You see, for Thomas, it was all just too much. It was all just too overwhelming. He couldn't even accept the story of his friends who had seen it. And yet, when Jesus was there, he realized he wasn't just a man, that he was God himself, and he was alive. Then Jesus says to him, "Because you have seen me, you have believed. Blessed are those who have not seen and yet have believed." You see, Thomas gets it. He sees Jesus alive. And what that proves is just remarkable. Because if Jesus is alive, that penalty has been paid. If Jesus is alive, he is who Thomas says he is: Lord and God. And if Jesus is alive, we can get to know him. It means that there is life after death. It means what he has said about life is true, and that we can be forgiven, and that we can have life too. Life as it was meant to be now, and life forever, not facing that hideous consequence that we deserve. Incredible. And yet, of course, we don't get the opportunity that Thomas did. We don't get the opportunity to put our fingers in his hands and our hand in his side. But as Jesus said, "Blessed are those who have not seen and yet have believed." You and I can look at the evidence for Jesus' resurrection. We can read the eyewitness accounts. If you were with us at lunchtime a few days ago, Pete gave a really great explanation of the basis of the resurrection. Do check on the website and listen to that. We can look at the evidence. We can see the truth of what happened. And ultimately, we will have to decide what we do with it. Do we continue on our own, doing what we want to do, or will we respond as Thomas has done to this guy, Jesus Christ? I said earlier in the week, I've got 3 children. And tomorrow morning, my wife would like to take my daughter out to get some new leggings and go for coffee. My daughter's 5, going on 17. She likes going for coffee. She has a chino. It's a baby chino, but she calls it a chino, and she just likes to chat. They are going to go to Sainsbury's, and there's a coffee shop there, which means it's a man's day at home. It's me and the boys, and we have got a man's day ahead of us. The first thing we've got to do is we've got a new cabinet that we've got to put together that's flat packed, so me and the boys with our drills will get busy. They love that. I've got 2 little boys, Freddie and Bobby. But one of the games, when I said to Freddie today, Freddie, we've got a man's day tomorrow, he's thrilled. He said, "Daddy, we play hide and seek." Now, I don't know if you've ever played hide and seek with a 3 and a 2-year-old before. It's quite easy to win, and I'm very competitive. And here's how it'll work out. I can pretty much predict what's going to happen. We will go out into the garden, and I will say, okay, I'll count, you boys hide. And I'll count to 10 slowly, because if you go beyond 10, Bobby doesn't understand that, and he comes out. So I'll count to 10, and they'll go and hide. Now, they seem to be incapable of hiding separately, so they'll hide together. That's one point in my advantage. And the second thing is that they just can't seem to, well, get it. Let me play it out for you. What'll happen is I'll count to 10, and I'll open my eyes and I'll say, I wonder where you are. I wonder where my boys are. Now, invariably, Bobby will be standing against a tree with his eyes like this. But Freddie, he may be hiding a bit better. And so I'll go around going, I wonder if he is under the table, the outdoor table. And there'll be a giggle from behind the shed. I'll say, I wonder if he's in the hedge. And there'll be a loud laugh from behind the shed. And then I'll say, I wonder if he's in the sand of the sandpit, as if that's possible. And at that point, knowing Fred, he won't be able to resist it any longer, and he'll come running out from behind the shed and dive into my arms, desperate to be found. He doesn't get the game. 1-0, basically. But here's the point. We think God is distant. We think God is not there. We think God makes it really hard for us to find him. But he doesn't. He wants to be found. He wants you to know him, and he wants you to know that he loves you more than you could possibly imagine. He wants you to see his son, to read about his son, and to respond to his son. Because his son is alive. He wants you to find him. Right down at the very end of our reading, it says this, but these are written that you may believe that Jesus is the Messiah, the Son of God, and that by believing you may have life in his name. Life in his name. Life that doesn't end. Life in all its fullness. There I am at the bottom of the sea, struggling for breath, and I reckon I've got one more push left. So I summoned all my energy, all the breath I had left in my lungs, and I pushed off the bottom of the sea towards the surface. And as I was coming towards the surface, you can kind of see through the water, and I can see a wave coming, and I think, I'm not going to make it. And I flounder around, and I'm still not going to make it, and I think this is it. And suddenly, I feel an arm underneath my shoulders. And I'm pulled out of the water, and I gasp for breath. And I hear the words, I've got you, mate. And my Aussie mate pulls me out of the water. And he swims with me, with our boards dragging behind us to the shore break, and we get smashed onto the beach. And we lay on the beach, exhausted, absolutely shattered. I was dead in that water. But now I was alive on the beach. My friend had saved my life, and all I could do in that moment, lying next to him on the sand as we were panting away, was turn to him and say, thank you. Thank you, you have saved my life. How will you respond to Jesus tonight? He has done the same for you. He has died a hideous death to bring you back into a relationship with God, and he is alive and wants to know you today. Will you respond to him? Will you, like Mary, hear this great news and rejoice? Will you, like Peter, not live in fear, but have great joy about what life holds for you now Jesus is alive? And perhaps, like Thomas, will you stop doubting and turn to him and say, "My Lord and my God." Now, I don't know what you're thinking. You do, I don't. But here's perhaps what you could be thinking now. Perhaps there's some of you sitting there going, "Do you know what? It's a great story, but nah." Well, can I challenge you to please have a look for yourself? Please read the book you've been given. Please come face to face with Jesus in the pages of the Bible and respond to him. Perhaps you'll sit there going, I think it's true, but I've got loads of questions. Great. Please ask the people that you came with or somebody you know who is a Christian the questions. And there's things you can come to here in Durham where you can be free to ask any question you like. And people will try their best to point you to the truth. But perhaps you're sat there tonight and you're a little bit like me on the beach. You've realized perhaps for the first time that he is alive and it's true and that he loves you. And you want to say thank you. You want to respond. Perhaps you even want to get to know him personally. I remember that moment for me. It was March the 12th, 1992. I'm quite old. Some of you probably weren't. Well, you were probably born then, but it was a while ago. And I remember that moment sitting there when somebody had explained to me what Jesus had done, and my heart was pounding because I knew it was true, and I didn't know what to do. Well, it's simple, really. We say, sorry. Sorry, Jesus, that I have not lived for you, but for myself. Please forgive me. I believe that you are who the Bible says you are. I believe you are the Son of God. And I put my trust in you, your death for my death. And I commit to following you. Please, can I have a relationship with you? And the Christians, we say amen at the end of that. That simply means I agree. And that is talking to God. That's what prayer is. And if that is you, I'm just going to say that again. And perhaps if we all close our eyes, it makes it less awkward for people. But perhaps if that is you, you might want to echo what I say now. God, we thank you that you're there. Thank you that you know me. Thank you that you love me. Thank you for Jesus. I am sorry that I have lived as if you are not there. I'm sorry for turning my back on you. Please forgive me. Thank you that Jesus' death on the cross pays for my rejection of you. Thank you that he is alive. I believe and trust in him. And I commit to following him. Thank you. Amen. If that's you tonight, please do tell your friend. And the others of you, please do find out for yourself. It's incredible. It's an incredible story. But if it's true, it's the most remarkable thing in the world. Thanks for listening.